When I was in late high school, early college for probably a span of about 4 years, 5 years maybe, I worked at Jay's Music, which was a music store in my hometown of Augusta. And it's the kind of job where when you're like a teenager, you get to go into the music store, you're into guitars and drums and things. You think that's what you want in your life. That could be that's the best possible job opportunity, is to work in that place that you like to hang out in. But as happens with a lot of jobs, when you kind of part the curtain and realize how the sausage is made, it sort of sucks some of the magic out of it, and it definitely did that.
It wasn't quite the Empire Records experience that you were looking for.
One of the owners had the worst case of obsessive compulsive disorder that I've ever experienced in my entire life.
Okay.
And for whatever reason, for a time, I was her go-to person to help her check in merchandise. The store was always a wreck. It was always just kind of like stacks of boxes. She was always, quote unquote, catching up. But this was a permanent state of affairs, this catching up.
Everything's always on fire.
Yeah. Exactly. And my job was to sit with her while she, went through these invoices and checked off the items that were in the boxes of the shipments. And then, I would take them and put them on the shelf, tag them, etc.
Right.
Just to show you how deep her OCD extended, a drum set typically comes shipped in two very large boxes.
Okay.
Very, very large. One of them has like the kick drum, and within that is nested like the snare drum and some other hardware and things. And the other one has all of the tom-tom drums like kind of nested within each other.
Right.
She would like count them. 1, 2. Okay, count it back to me. And I'd go 1, 2. And she'd go, okay. Now count it back to me again.
Slow down.
1,
slow it down.
2. And I'd be like 1, 2. Okay, one more time. And then we're good. And this is, obviously this is a serious condition, and,
Right.
and she wasn't medicated for it, I don't believe. And if she was, it definitely wasn't working. She was also a very unpleasant person. So it was just kind of one thing adding on to the other.
Right.
But there was one kind of magical thing that happened every year that I always looked forward to. There were a couple things, actually. So one of them was, this was in Augusta, Georgia, which is the home of two things, James Brown and the Masters Golf Tournament. James Brown was born there, and he lived there up until he passed away, actually. And the Masters Golf Tournament to this day continues to be held there, right next to where Jay's Music was. It is no longer there because the Augusta National basically has been buying up every piece of property around the golf course for many, many years. Jay's was the lone holdout for a long time, and I guess they finally offered him enough money, so now it's just like bulldozed and it doesn't exist anymore.
Wow. If Augusta was cool, if the Masters was cool, they would have had James Brown play there every year.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm sure you know that the history of the Masters and probably of golf in general has a pretty checkered racial, bias kind of past.
Yeah,
It was, they only let Tiger Woods play because he was like super awesome and wasn't like that black. In fact, Dave Chappelle, when he did a stand-up bit when he played in Augusta, and he walked on stage and said, "Welcome to Augusta, Georgia, the whitest and blackest city in America," which I thought was very funny. So the Masters was fun because we'd close the store essentially, and then us kids would just would park cars, and we'd sometimes get tips and things like that, and it was just like an excuse to not have to really work and just kind of hang out and chat and smoke weed and stuff, and it was pretty awesome.
Right.
The other favorite part of the year was James Brown related. Every year, James Brown would rent a bunch of equipment from Jay's to do rehearsals for his upcoming tours. He was, he's known as the hardest working man in show business,
right,
which meant he was on the road constantly.
Just after you,
well,
second hardest working man.
We do share a last name, in fact, but no relation, only in work ethic when it comes to show business. But his management or whatever figured it was easier to rent equipment from Jay's, including the drums down to every single thing, guitars, guitar amps, all of the whole nine, and set it up in this local theater called the Imperial Theater. It was cheaper to do that than it was to take their stuff off of the road or off of their like storage, because they were playing internationally. They were always all over the place. So me and my coworkers, every year, Sometimes maybe it happened twice a year. I'm just kind of getting a little hazy, but we would take whatever they needed, go to the Imperial Theater, set it all up, including chairs for the horn sections and, everything. We kind of get told where to put things by James's road manager, or Mr. Brown, excuse me. If you ever called him anything but Mr. Brown, you'd get in big trouble.
Right.
He was very, very formal guy. Mr. Brown's road manager would tell us where to put everything. We'd set everything up, mic everything up, including PA, monitors, microphones, everything on the stage. So literally on the stage at the Imperial Theater, which is this really cool old theater in Augusta, where I also used to work. I after my Jay's days, I was a live sound guy for a period, and I worked at the Imperial Theater doing sound for theater productions and live bands and all of that. But this was just before that.
So you were essentially a roadie for James Brown.
It was a roadie, a miniature roadie, for a day.
Right.
It was actually more than a day, because it was we'd have the setup, the load in, and then they'd practice for 2 or 3 days, and then we'd come back at the end and pick it all up.
Right.
And my good friend, still to this day, a guy named J.J. Bowers, was the sort of senior member of the Jay's music staff. And by that, I mean, at the time, he was probably 24, and I was
he was the veteran.
Yeah, totally. And I guess I must have been 17 or 18, something along those lines.
Yeah.
Isn't it weird how age, in retrospect, seniors in high school when you're in 5th grade seem like they may as well be 50, from where you stand. It was kind of like that. I looked up to JJ. Yeah. He was best drummer to this day that I've ever known in my life. Absolutely.
He can almost rent a car. He's so awesome.
Right. Incredible. That's the kind of stuff we talked about, but I, wasn't even old enough to drink yet. Just driving barely for a handful of years at this point. So we'd set up all the stuff, then we'd go back to the store, which is a drag, because it was oh man, the fun, little diversion is now done, and now we have to go back to having to sell Taylor guitars, and I was the guy that restrung all the guitars and did all the repairs and things, which was fun. I definitely learned a lot, but it was also under the watchful eye of the owner of the store, whose name was Vera. It was very stern task mistress, as I've kind of made clear, I think.
Right.
But we always had to look forward to when we get to go back and take everything down, because then we get to hang out with JJ. We kind of got to take our time. It wasn't it was in the evening usually, even though that was technically we were working overtime to do this. In our minds, our teenage minds, it was a privilege to be able to do this.
Yeah. Of course.
So I go back to the theater, and I realized that they're not finished yet. They're actually not done rehearsing. And so I'm standing outside with, my buddy at the time who I was working with, and we're listening to them wrap up their set. And, I don't know if you ever saw James Brown live, but this is super theatrical, incredible, funky, horns, and, everyone in his band is at the top of their game. He was notorious for if someone in the band made a mistake, while they were playing, he would just kind of covertly say, "Gotcha," and point at him. And, if you've ever listened to many James Brown songs, a lot of the lyrics, quote unquote, are really just him kind of riffing and going,
yeah, take it to the bridge.
He could slip a gotcha in there, and no one would be the wiser, but the band member would know, okay, that means I'm getting my pay docked.
Yeah. I heard stories about him in the studio too. If they made a mistake, that they would get their pay docked.
That's right. He was all about efficiency.
That's right.
But
you just got to listen to him, because he's directing the chorus. He's
like you said, take it to the bridge. All right, here comes the chorus or whatever. He was a band leader, is what he was. He was a very old fashioned kind of in that way. He would conduct the band, and he was the guy who you would look to for the changes and all of that. And if you messed up, then he'd get you, and you'd get got, and then you'd get docked.
Right.
So I'm out there listening to this performance, and it's I'm young music nerd. I think this is pretty cool. I think I was more at that time kind of into Incubus and
POD,
System of a Down. I don't think I ever went down the POD road, but I was definitely into harder kind of radio rock. Both of my parents were actually opera singers, so I I grew up without like a mentor for like popular music. I kind of had to find it myself. Both of my parents, they looked at music as work. And so then they were working on whatever opera they were singing in, or my dad was a choral conductor. They were studying, it wasn't like listening for kicks. So I kind of had to find my way to my own musical taste, which meant that I had a couple of embarrassing years where I was listening to, nu metal and, Limp Bizkit and things like that, which, by the way, super stoked about the new Limp Bizkit record that just dropped.
Oh, what? I didn't even know it was out.
Yeah.
I mean, last Limp Bizkit news I heard was watching the Woodstock 99 documentary.
Yeah. Well, they apparently have a new album coming that just came out called Limp Bizkit Still Sucks. And now Fred Durst is going with this kind of like dad vibe look. I don't know if you've seen pictures of him where he's got like a fake gray wig on and like a gray mutton chop kind of situation.
I mean, I remember when he wrote a movie that John Travolta was in.
Oh, boy.
There was a lot going on there.
A lot going on there. It's called The Fanatic or something like that.
Yeah.
It's about like a mentally disturbed, stalkery fan of an actor, and John Travolta really gives it his all. You can't say he didn't do that. But anyway, so I wasn't like, I didn't fully appreciate, I don't think, what I was witnessing. Like I sort of maybe took it for granted a little bit and just looked at it as an excuse to kind of get away from work and kind of like, not be, bossed around or whatever. And just kind of like, it was just more of like an escape. But I was hearing them play and it was definitely cool. And then I think I walked away because the scene that I'm about to describe, I did not hear firsthand. I what I'm about to describe, I heard described to me when I went in. So I couldn't have been standing out there listening the whole time because I didn't hear any of this that I'm about to tell you. Right. So I'm assuming that I walked away for whatever reason. And I came back a little while later and they were done. And the backstage door was open. There's like a big loading dock kind of situation in the back of the Imperial with like a, one of those garage doors that kind of roll up and then like a ramp. Right. And I walked out on the stage and, a handful of musicians are still there, packing up their stuff. And in the spot where James Brown would have been singing, he always used a straight microphone stand, and he was known for like manipulating the mic stand and like, kicking it down and popping it back up with his foot, or like doing little, things that like Prince would have kind of learned from him, those kind of moves, And everyone is gathered around, not everyone, but like a handful of people are gathered around this mic stand, just like staring in awe. And I'm kind of like, I don't understand what's going on. I get a little closer and I kind of peek through the crowd. And I see that the mic stand, it's a straight mic stand. It's not sitting straight though. It's sitting at this weird canted angle, like it's tilted to the side. It's resting on the edge of the round microphone stand base.
Okay.
And it's sort of like a magic trick. It's like, what is keeping this thing from falling over? I don't understand. And clearly a lot of other people didn't understand either because everyone's looking at this thing, with like wonder in their eyes. And I look a little closer and I realized that the mic cord had kind of wrapped itself around the base of the stand in just such a way that it was like holding it up and at this like canted angle. Yeah. And this is weird already. Right. So I go to my friend JJ. I'm like, what the hell's going on? What's going on with this mic stand? He's like, dude, it was insane. So they're like doing their big finale, and it's like, probably the beginning of which I had heard, and then I walked away for a bit and then came back. You know? And James does this move where he spins around and he kicks the mic stand over and then he pops it back up with his foot. Like when the thing's like almost on the floor, he takes his foot and kicks it down onto the base of the stand and it pops it back up straight. And he was known for doing that like several times in a row. He'd do a spin, pop it down, kick it back up. Do another spin, pop it back down, kick it back up. And apparently, according to my friend JJ, on the third iteration of that, spin and kick down and pop back up, it stops halfway. It stops halfway, and James Brown freaks out. He backs away from the mic stand. He stops everybody. He stops the band from playing. He says, "Stop! Everybody, take 5." Yeah. And he is clearly just like been spooked in a very real way by what has happened here. His road manager, I believe it was his road manager, might have been his manager, but it's a guy named Ronnie Van Zant, which is the best name for a, musician adjacent, kind of grizzled tour guy that could ever possibly be. My friend JJ hears all this transpire. He says, he leaned into Ronnie and he goes, "Ronnie, go get the flag." And so, there's that period of James Brown where he would do the thing with the cape, and like he had this like hype band named Danny Ray, who actually recently passed away. I knew Danny Ray. I knew a lot of the people in his band. They were just around. They would shop at the music store. Like it was sort of like he was just kind of a fixture, like the way Michael Stipe was a fixture in Athens, Georgia. Like kind of James Brown was always kind of around.
Yeah, the kind of way that like Andy Dick is a fixture of West Hollywood.
Yeah, exactly. Or even I forget the guy's name, but he played Josh in The Office, who was kind of the boss of the Stanford branch, who like carried his bike into work, and Jim kind of had an affinity for him or whatever. That guy, whatever that actor's name is, he's also in this show called Outer Banks. That's very popular. He apparently, I was in Nashville for a conference recently and saw him at every bar. There's this really famous karaoke place in Nashville called Santa's. It's like in a double wide trailer, and it's really, really cool. And he was there, and he sang Inner Sandman, and so he's like, clearly. So anyway, James Brown was like that guy,
right.
And Andy Dick to Augusta, Georgia.
Right.
He didn't live in Augusta though. He lived in South Carolina. He lived in a little city called Beach Island, South Carolina, which is where his James Brown estate was. But he had like a radio station that he owned in Augusta, and he was always just around. A good buddy of mine named Coco had a venue called the Soul Bar that was obviously named after the Godfather of Soul, and it was full of all this James Brown memorabilia. And James, I think, got a kick out of Mr. Brown got a kick out of the fact that someone had made a bar in his basically hometown dedicated to him. So he popped in every now and then, and there's pictures of him and my friend's daughter as she was growing up and all of that. Very, 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 very cool. But I had never seen the man. Everybody I knew had seen him at some point or another, where it's like, whether it's like in the grocery store or just somewhere, because Beach Island, there's not a lot going on. So he would probably, it's very close. So he would probably go into town if he was doing it himself, or like, send somebody. But everybody I knew had some James Brown story where they'd seen James Brown, they'd encountered James Brown. They said, "Oh, Mr. Brown, it's such an honor to meet you." And he would just kind of mumble and like walk away. But everyone had a story, and I didn't have one. I never encountered him in the flesh.
Right.
And even at this thing where I'm doing what I'm doing, I still don't see James Brown.
Yeah.
I see the aftermath of James Brown. I see his band. I see this weird mic stand, that's like sitting at this canted angle.
Yeah.
But James Brown has left the building at this point. So he says to Ronnie Van Zant, this is when I'm not there, go get the flag.
Yeah.
And JJ is picturing him bringing out some kind of glistening American flag, like, star-studded kind of sequined rhinestone cape, right? Yeah. That he's going to drape over him or do some crazy thing. That is not what Ronnie Van Zant brought out. Ronnie Van Zant brought out a tiny American flag on a stick. Like you'd buy at like a gift shop for, a national monument or something. Like,
right.
You know what I mean? Like
little 4th of July parade waver.
4th of July thing, like the one that little Evie waves around in Grey Gardens, if you've ever seen that. Very similar to that. He gives it to James.
Mr. Brown.
And then James holds it and leads everybody in the building, the band, everybody who he has to stop playing, in an a cappella round of God Bless America. And then, that's what happened. And I'm hearing this from Jay. I'm like, what? That's crazy. What? I don't understand. And then somebody else, some older person, I don't remember if it was somebody with the theater or if it was somebody in the band or whatever, they kind of clue us into what was really going on here. James is Mr. Brown's previous wife had passed away not terribly, terribly long ago, before this happened. And guess where they had her funeral?
At that theater?
At the Imperial Theater.
Oh, my God.
And her casket was laid in the exact place where his microphone stand was situated.
Wow.
And, I mean, the only implication being that he had to have in some way thought that the ghost of his dead wife was holding up that mic stand from beyond the grave.
Yeah.
Now, he didn't ever say that, and it's just conjecture, but I mean, he really looked at it like, again, and I trust my friend, implicitly. He looked at this thing like he'd seen a ghost. I mean, it's a cliche for a reason. And then he, did all this kind of ceremonial stuff. I just think that's what it had to be. And after I hear this, I'm like, holy cow, this is incredible. At the time I was, I think I was actually early college by this point, maybe, but I was only like around 18, and I had a Pentax black and white, 35 millimeter camera, and it was in my car. And this was before smartphones. Yeah. This is like, so I ran to my car to get this camera. My car was probably a block away, and I came back, and of course, in the taking down of all the stuff, and straightening up and getting things reset, the mic stand had been knocked back down to its original straight up position.
Damn it.
And then it was a handful of years later. I was still in college, but for a time, I was actually an intern for public radio, for Georgia Public Radio, while I was still in college, and I was studying broadcast journalism. And I got into University of Georgia for music, but I decided not to go because so many people that I knew, I played in bands and kind of was always into music, like I said, working at Jay's. Everyone that I knew that went on to go to music school or study music academically ended up hating it, or it ended up like sucking the joy out of music, the same way working at the music store kind of sucked the joy out of music stores for me. Right. So I decided, what, maybe I'm going to go a different path. So I studied broadcast journalism, went to my hometown university, and I interned there for a while as a kind of, I would answer phones during requests, like a classical music request show. My boss was this old dude named Alan Cook, who I adore very much to this day. He was like he used to write jingles, like in St. Louis was a big jingle town, like in the 50s or something. And he was an excellent guitarist and just a really cool dude, and had this classical music request show. And my job was to answer the phones. These little blue hair ladies would call in and make their requests for like, Firebird Suite and very obvious things every single week, and I would write it down on a little sticky note and run it into his booth and stick it on the desk, and he'd play the request. Eventually, Georgia Public Broadcasting decided they wanted to do news out of all of their bureaus, and Augusta was one of them. And Alan was like about to retire. He's like, I'm not doing that. Noel, you figure out how to do news for these radio people. And so I would do little news packages and get Vox Pop, they called it, like just tape man on the street sound, and during elections, local elections and things like that. And occasionally, if a big story happened in little old Augusta, like I would cover the Masters and do little packages for NPR sports. Like I got a few pieces on NPR, but my big break, I guess you could say, is when Mr. James Brown passed away on Christmas Day of, I don't fully recall what year it was. Let's look it up just so I can sound smart. James Brown.
I'm going to guess 2012.
It was 2006.
Oh, I was way off.
He died on December 25th of 2006 at Emory University Hospital in Atlanta. And there was all this crazy controversy around his death because he was infamous for kind of not having his shit together in terms of like business type stuff. Like he should have and could have made way more money than he did if he had like some higher powered, entertainment agency looking after his interests. But he always just had friends and local people. And I think people were like robbing from the kitty and things like that. And it just wasn't, it wasn't an ideal situation. And
also, cocaine's a hell of a drug.
No doubt. And I'm pretty sure he was rocking, no pun intended, that stuff. Yeah. Pun totally intended after the fact, till he passed. I don't recall how he passed. It was a heart attack and fluid in his lungs, according to the internet, which could be the kind of thing that would be, a byproduct of drug abuse for many, many years.
I mean, he worked very hard on stage too. I mean, I'm sure he put his heart into everything, and he also gave his heart quite the workout.
Yeah. He was into like PCP and stuff. I mean, there was a whole thing, I don't know if you remember, where he like went on a high-speed police chase after he like shot up his business office, which was in Augusta, and like, the police chased him and shot his tires out, and he just kept driving. And he was apparently on PCP when that happened. But Anyway, so I got to cover his passing, and NPR wanted quite a few pieces on that. The guy's like a legend, you know. I mean, all his civil rights activism, and everything about this man and his career aligned with all of that stuff. Best friends with like Reverend Al Sharpton, and influence on Michael Jackson and Prince, and countless. There'd be no like Rolling Stones, if there wasn't for James Brown. He was like, not only was he the godfather of soul, in many ways he like reinvented, or maybe even kind of invented what we know today as like rock and roll, in a lot of ways.
Yeah, totally.
So I covered his funeral, and it was at our local arena, which they had actually renamed. I think it was before he passed. Renamed the James Brown Arena, and it's the kind of municipal, big old indoor, concrete, pretty hideous arena, but it needed to be held in an arena because it was James Brown, and like thousands and thousands and thousands of people wanted to be there. Michael Jackson was there. He was surrounded by all these like Nation of Islam dudes with these like little bow ties, and it was the weirdest thing. Bootsy Collins was there. Mick Jagger was there. Like all of these luminaries were there. Al Sharpton, Dick Gregory did a talk or a eulogy, but Michael Jackson got up there, and like seeing Michael Jackson walk into a room like that and talk, it was sort of like if you saw like Scooby-Doo walk into a room, or like seriously, it was just like uncanny valley. And I'm not speaking about his plastic surgery. It was just he loomed so large that to see a person like that you only know from pop culture and television and stuff, like as in the flesh, it was very surreal. And James Brown's body was laid out in this casket. It was open casket. And that's the only time I ever saw James Brown.
No.
Was in his casket.
Oh man. I mean, the notion of haunting a theater is if I were a ghost, I would absolutely haunt a theater.
Sure.
And I would be a very critical ghost, I feel too. I would kind of boo at, everything that was going on.
Or at the very least, just make the lights flicker,
right?
Kind of in Morse code, saying this sucks. Isn't that trippy though, man? Like, I grew up surrounded by this dude.
Yeah.
Everything, like in my town, like the bar, Soul Bar. That's where I cut my teeth playing gigs and playing in like indie rock bands. Never saw him in person. Adjacent to this event with this microphone stand, never actually saw him. Everybody I knew saw him. I only finally see him laying dead in his casket. It was actually an important moment for my career because I'm a podcast producer, and that all came from my work with public radio. And if it wasn't for, the James Brown thing definitely got me more gigs and more clout, and the fact that I had, had pieces on NPR, and they started using me more because they were aware of me at that point. I don't know. It's all just very serendipitous and fascinating to me.
Well, at least you got to finally see him, At least it was an open casket. If it was a closed casket, then, you never would have seen him.
He was very shiny. I remember that. But then there was a whole thing where they didn't bury him for weeks. They had him like laying in like cryostasis or something like that. Like, cause there was like the family was arguing, like I was talking about earlier, with like all, his affairs were not in order, as they say. And the family was like arguing over whatever, like who owned what, and for whatever reason they didn't bury him for a really long time. And I remember that being the source of quite a few conspiracy theories. And if I'm not mistaken, there was a documentary, maybe it's not out yet, but it was something to do with CNN about this whole controversy, and like did they ever really bury him? Is he still like laying out frozen in someone's basement?
Even in death, he's still the hardest working man in showbiz.
Exactly. Yeah.
So of that whole experience, what would you say how were you changed after? What did you learn? What did you take away from it?
Well, it's weird. Like I'm one of the things I do for work is a critical thinking approach to conspiracy podcast. So right. I'm always, up against the idea of, are there ghosts? Is there an afterlife? Are there extraterrestrials or, other extra dimensional beings, right? And I don't know, like you can explain away what happened with that mic stand. You can totally dissect it down to it was this mic cord wrapped around the base of it, but I've never seen anything like that happen before.
Yeah. And I'm sure if you tried to do it a million times again, the odds of it.
Never make it happen. So yeah, it definitely left me with a sense of wonderment about that stuff. But also, I think what I just said, it left me with a sense of like, okay, I think sometimes things happen for a reason, serendipitously or whatever. Like all of that stuff and all of that experience, working at Jay's, being there for all of that, having that experience, leading to me kind of coming full circle with me covering his funeral for public radio, all kind of led to where I am today. And it's sort of made me open to experiences and also just being kind of like on the lookout for, not on the lookout because that sort of like cheapens it, but just like being, I think it's just as simple as just being open to experiences and just letting things kind of wash over you and letting things happen and not trying to always control everything or like, because at the end of the day, what will be, and if you can just be ready to kind of bob and weave and adapt, chances are you can make a good go out of whatever happens to you. But I have found that I've been throughout my career and my life exposed to these kind of oddball situations that, because I was open to them, kind of led me to other interesting things. Yeah. So I think it's that.
Well, I love that. I often my brain immediately starts to want to pick things apart or figure them out, and then I have to go, wait, just enjoy that thing before you try and get down to the fundamentals of it and figure out how that magic trick works. Can't we just enjoy the magic trick?
Yeah. And sure, I mean, it's fun to figure out how to do magic tricks yourself, or like learn, the secrets behind things. But also, like I said, when I worked at the music store, it made me kind of like music stores less because I knew too much about how everything went into it, and it wasn't fun.
I wish that happened to me because my first job was an ice cream shop, and it did not have that effect.
Well, that's fair. I mean, I think you also didn't have to hang out with a nightmare woman checking in, boxes of guitar cables for 13 hours a day.
What if she was my boss too? That'd be weird.
That would have been wild.
She'd be like, count the chocolate chips in.
Exactly.
Start over.
She would have done it. They also like sent us kids out for food. They never cooked, so we always just would like go and get her the same meal every day from this deli called the Sunshine Bakery every single day. I could tell a million stories about Jay's in and of itself, but this is kind of the central one for me, the sort of defining one. And like I said, now it's gone. The Masters or the Augusta National is kind of bulldozed or turned into Masters adjacent properties, everything that's around there on Washington Road.
You guys needed to do like a concert to raise money to save Jay's.
Nobody wanted to save Jay's. They had a bad rep. They were not the best folks in terms of like just trying to put one over on people a lot of the time. Like they would try to sell you something for the what the list price was, as opposed to and acting like they were doing you a solid, because this is also before the days of like Musician's Friend and catalogs, and boy, when the internet and those came along, they were not happy because it took the power right out of their hands, and they had to like match prices and stuff. And so I think they saw the end in sight, at least as far as their business model was concerned.
Welcome back. So I've got another story from you from our live Storyoki event that we did in New York City. And this one's from Tamara Davis, who, in my opinion, was the hardest working person in Times Square.
All right, so this story is kind of two birds, one stone, because this is not only the story of the worst job I ever had, this is the story of when I got robbed in the middle of Times Square. And if you guys know anything about Times Square, you know how sometimes they have the cops with the bazookas and the AK-47s. For whatever reason, on this particular day, they were not there. And they were completely ghosts, so I was on my own. And this is also technically my first job. I worked for a tourism company in New York City. So they did like hop on, hop off tours. Typical tourist trap where like the top of the bus was open and you could gaze up at all the overpriced real estate and like take pictures. So I didn't work on the street, the ones that harass tourists, like, oh, you want to buy a ticket? No. I worked inside the office where if you bought a ticket online, you had to bring a voucher to the office so that we could exchange it for the real ticket. A really antiquated system. So antiquated that we actually didn't have registers. So we didn't have change. So if you didn't have card or exact change, we either sent you, really sorry, or we ourselves had to go out and find change. We had a location in, yeah, I know. We had a location in Port Authority bus terminal, and it was just me and my coworker there. And I told her, you know what, you stay here, I'll take this $100 bill, and I'll go get us change. So I went to Duane Reade. It was right across the street from Port Authority. It's still there. Fuck that Duane Reade. Anyway, I went to the cashier, and I said, do you have change for $100? And at the counter was this guy who I actually subconsciously thought was the manager because he was dressed very like professional, and he had a lanyard with like his ID on it. And so I said to the cashier, do you have change? She didn't really say anything to me. She just kind of looked at the guy, and the guy was like, you need change? And I was like, yeah. And so he's like, okay, cool. And so he takes the $100 bill, and he starts walking. And I think he's walking behind the desk to the register to get change. But like he keeps walking, like towards the door. And so quickly I'm like, the fuck? So I go, and I'm like, my guy, where are you going? And he's like, what do you mean? I said, my change. He's like, you didn't give me any money. I'm like, oh, hell no. So he walks out, right? And I'm like, dude, my $100 bill, where are you going with my $100 bill? He's like, I didn't take no $100 bill from you. What are you talking about? And so I'm like, dude, you have my money, and I want it. And so he's not really having that. He walks out into traffic, like trying to get away from me, like with full-on car. You guys have been in Times Square. Full-on cars coming. He does not care. He's willing to die for this $100 bill. And I guess I was willing to die too, because I followed him. And he's walking into traffic, and I'm like, dude, there's this traffic cop, right? That when we get to the other side, there's this traffic cop there. I'm like, this guy just stole $100 from me. And the traffic cop is like, well, I can't really leave my post. And he says to the guy, did you take the $100? And the guy's like, I didn't take any money. You can search me. And I said, well, I'm not touching you. That's number one. Number two, you definitely did, and I want my money, or I'm going to call the cops on you, bottom line. He's like, okay, call the cops. And I guess he thought I was bluffing, but I called his bluff, and I pull out my phone, and I start calling the cops. So he's like, naturally, he's like, oh, shit. So he starts running away. The traffic cop already told me he can't really do anything. He has to stay where he is. So I start chasing him. Mind you, at this point, this isn't even my money. This is the company's money. I'm employee of the month after this for the worst job of my life. It's the company's money, but like I'm like, the guy just took $100 from me. Also, technically, it's my money, because at this job, if you are short money, they make you pay it back. And I really was just not doing that. So I was like, okay, I need to get this $100 back. So I'm on the phone with 911, saying that this guy I'm in the middle of Times Square, and this guy just stole $100 from me. And I'm like following him, and he's like trying to get away from me. And so the people on the phone are completely incompetent. They're like, wait, where are you? What street? Wait, but where are you in front of? And I'm like, oh my goodness, NYPD, so useless. And so he stops at this random like smoke shop, and he goes inside. And I'm like, okay. And then he's telling me, come inside the smoke shop. And I'm like, no. Why would I do that? I'm going to stay here on phone with 911, and I'm going to tell them to come to the smoke shop. So I guess he realizes that I'm really not going to come into the smoke shop for whatever he's trying to pull. So he runs out the store, he punches me in the face, and he bolts. He takes off running. And I'm like, oh, hell no. So I take off running after him, right? I'm employee of the month. Oh my goodness. I take off running after him. And I was about to, if I got my hands on him, I was prepared to fight. So he's running. He runs into the subway, right? Hops the turnstile, gets on the train that happens to be there. Fuck the MTA. Happens to be there. Trains, doors close. He's gone. 5 minutes later, the cops show up at the train station. And they're like, where's the guy? And I'm like, first of all, where were you? Second of all, he's gone. He hopped on the train, and they were like, oh, yeah, sorry, I don't know what to tell you. I guess he's gone. And I'm like, what? And so I'm like, we can go to the Dwayne Reed and get the security footage and see, like, who the guy is. And so we go to the Dwayne Reed, and the manager doesn't really want to give us the security footage because she doesn't really want to be liable for what happened in the store. And so she's like, oh, I don't really want to. And then I'm like, you really need to give the security footage. The cops aren't really having it. And then they get the security footage, and they're like, okay, my manager for my job comes to the Dwayne Reed because obviously I've been gone for like an hour at this point. And he's like, what the fuck where are you? And I'm like, yeah, I'm in Dwayne Reed because I got robbed, and like we need the security footage of the guy. And he's like, huh? So he comes to the Dwayne Reed, and he's like, so what's going on? I'm like, yeah, I have to file a police report, and then if they can find him, then it is what it is. And he looks at me deadpan, and he goes, you know that's a shortage, right? A shortage meaning I have to pay the $100. And I said, go fuck yourself. That's a shortage? And he was like, yeah, it's a shortage. I said, I'm not paying that. And he's like, okay, we'll see. So he sends it up the chain with the story and everything, and I guess the higher-ups get back, and they're like, yeah, she has to pay $100 for the shortage because she got robbed. And I was like, well, I'm really not paying that. That's not fair. And my manager goes, well, whether you like it or not, you have to pay it. And I'm like, well, whether you like it or not, I quit. And he was like, huh? He was like, huh? I was like, I spoke English. Whether you like it or not, I quit. And he's like, no, wait. Because this job has very high turnover. At that point, I'd been there 4 years. I don't know how I did. I must be a masochist. At that point, I'd been there 4 years. It's still my longest job ever. And he's like, oh, no, you don't have to quit. We'll ask about it. A week goes by, they're trying to negotiate, like, oh, she doesn't have to pay it. But the higher-ups are like, no, we want our $100. And I'm like, well, you just lost your best employee for $100. So I quit the job, needless to say. And the day that I quit, I walked out. I went back to Port Authority where one of my other coworkers and one of my best friends was working. And then I show up, and she's like, what are you doing here? I was like, well, I quit. So I'm here to just hang out with you for the rest of your shift, and then we're going to go get drinks, and we're going to celebrate, because fuck this job. I'm not going to say the company, but they went out of business, and they kind of deserved it. But that's my story.
Wow. Yeah, seriously. Employee of the year, I think was said over there. I wonder where that guy is today. Maybe he's outside. Wow, I learned a lot from that story. Mainly, fuck Dwayne Reed, fuck the cops, fuck the MTA, fuck that company, and fuck that guy. That guy needs to pay for what he did. There's got to be a way we can, bring him to justice. Maybe he's listening right now. Hey, guy who stole $100 and punched Tamara in the face. Here's what I want you to do. If you're listening, guy, I want you to go follow us on Instagram right now and turn yourself in via the DMs. I don't know if that's going to work. What about all you true crime armchair detectives out there? Can't you help track this scumbag down? Oh my God, did we just start a Fable Baby crime fighting division? Am I the Batman of podcasts now? Podman. Or is it the Batcast? Hey, Seth Rogen, guess what? You can have Storytime because we're changing the name of the podcast again to #Vengeance Time. Oh, yeah. I'd listen to the shit out of that podcast. Hey, thanks for listening to the shit out of this podcast. I'd love to give another huge shout out and thanks to Noel Brown for being on the podcast and sharing his story. As always, you can find all the links to the stuff he has going on in the description. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please leave us a review. It helps us out a ton, and I literally read every single one of them. Also, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of next week's episode with the Pointer Brothers. Here's a sneaky little peeky.
So we show up to this house, and there's a garage door, right? We open the garage door and you can't see more than a foot and a half in front of you, and you're immediately smacked in the face with this smell that I can't even describe. I don't know if it's old food, if it's moldy something, if it's like a dead animal. Like I have
Probably everything.
no idea what this smell was. And neither one of us, we had no idea what we were getting into. And this was just the garage door.
Hashtag Storytime is produced by iHeartRadio and Curativity Productions. Hosted by Will McFadden. Sound designed by Tony Maddox. Written by Will McFadden and Jason Shapiro. Produced by Jason Shapiro, Daniela Mora, and Jordan Elijah Michael. Theme song by Scott Simons. Artwork by John Kusagai.